The views expressed on this podcast are those of the participants, not of Reuters News.
I think they're seeing this as a sort of, not only the companies, but obviously their investors are seeing this as a winner-take-most market. And so they're trying to be the first and the best to get there, which is why everybody's throwing so much money at it without any clear sense of, where profit or revenue. I mean, there's some sense of where revenue might come from, either subscriptions or advertising, productivity gains, new products, but profit is sort of the open question, I think.
Set aside the colossal reordering of global trade, the ongoing battles between the Trump administration and the courts, the rearming of Europe, or the continuing rise of China. Underneath all of these chaotic gyrations, there is still one story continuing unimpeded: artificial intelligence, which continues to leap forward. The capabilities of leading models from OpenAI, Anthropic, xAI, DeepSeek, and others are still improving. In the US, Microsoft, Alphabet, Amazon, Meta Platforms are set to spend a collective $320 billion this year alone on data centers and the like to power these advanced chatbots. New twists are emerging. Sam Altman-led OpenAI, the company that started off this phase of the race with its ChatGPT bot, is acquiring legendary iPhone designer Jony Ive's startup, IO, for $6.5 billion. American trade warriors are further squeezing Chinese accents to cutting-edge chips and software. In the real world, moonshots like Google's self-driving taxi unit Waymo are taking off. The status of this titanic arms race is the subject of this week's Viewsroom. Welcome back to the Viewsroom, the weekly podcast that invites you, the listener, into a lively debate with Breaking Views columnists. I'm your host, Jonathan Guilford.
And I'm Amy Donlan. So, Jonathan, Titanic, quite an adjective for this sector. I mean, I think obviously all of our listeners will know something about AI, but we're hoping to just sort of uncover, I guess, what the main tension of this evolving market is, right? So to a casual observer, ChatGPT has become maybe the greatest homework cheating device ever, right? So you're in university, you need to write a paper, and rather than go through all those boring textbooks, you can basically get a bit of help on how to do things. I think that's what a lot of people kind of associate it with. But as you said, robo-taxis are taking to the streets. Social media is filling up with AI-generated words and images, and it is actually increasingly difficult to distinguish like what is genuine and what is not. Yet even amid all of that excitement and all of that frenzy, the financial results of the companies chasing hardest to develop this technology seem to still lag behind. So fortunately, we have Karen Kwok, Breaking View's very own OpenAI watcher, and Jeffrey Goldfarb, the global finance editor of Breaking Views, both of which have been avidly kind of following this situation. So Karen, Jeff, you are very welcome to the Viewsroom.
Hi.
Thanks. Hi.
So Karen, I mean, as I said, we want to kind of focus in a little bit here because as we said, this is a huge, huge market. But I just wanted maybe if you could give us a bit of a sense as when OpenAI kicked off the chatbot race with ChatGPT in late 2022, this technology basically seemed like a sort of a very fancy autocomplete. Now OpenAI is valued at $300 billion and everyone is pouring billions of dollars into this tech. What exactly is the promise here?
I think since then, the technology has evolved a lot. Like there's like some reasoning model that the chatbot come out, not just like helping you to do your homework, but actually can actually talk to you like a human being. I think in a lot of interviews recently, Sam Altman gave is that ChatGPT is becoming your life advisor. Like the people in 20 and 30, they actually go to ChatGPT to ask for decisions making process, and like to before they actually make a decision. A lot of my friends are like treating ChatGPT as like dating advisor, for example. So it's like seriously, like, and then so it's actually a lot has progressed from just being like to help you to cheat for your homework and your exams, I think. And so it's and as Sam Altman always say, like they want like ChatGPT become your assistant, to be your advisors, be your friend. And so I think that is the thing that it's kind of like pinning the home the promise here. And the recent purchase of them of this Johnny Ive, like this Apple iPhone designers. iPod designers, his startups of building the next generation of whatever device it will be to enable like consumer AI is basically another step for them to go further beyond what they have achieved. Basically,
I mean, this is also like a complete like rush into the abyss, right? I mean, in the sense that we're 5 minutes into AI. Like, honestly, like, I mean, for all the use cases that Karen just went through, and there are many more, I mean, we're not even close to like figuring out what all the use cases will be, right? And that's what this frenzy is all about. And it's, another point to think about is like you just had Microsoft, which is one of the biggest investors in AI, just lay off a whole bunch of their engineers because AI is already like being able to do some of the coding that their engineers were doing. So, I mean, it's all like moving at this insane pace. And a year from now, we will be talking about ways that this is being applied and used that like we never would have imagined. And so, imagine like 10 years from now, how exponentially that will have changed as well.
Jonathan, before we get into another question, I just wanted to comment on one of Karen's uses, because one of the things I fear so much about the younger generation is they don't speak to people enough. And when I was younger and you wanted dating advice, you went to your friends, maybe your sister, not a computer bot. Oh my God, the end of the world is nigh. Okay, anyway, Jonathan, go ahead.
Honestly, having known my peer group, I don't see how it could get any worse. So, but no, like it's interesting, Jeff, what you were saying about this, being 5 minutes into AI. It is curious because like even the foundational, I guess, scientific models that we have sitting behind this stuff, like, if I remember correctly, the paper laying out the kind of computational model of the neuron was back in the early 20th century, and the perceptron and all of that came a couple decades later. And then it seemed like long fallow period, and then something clicked. And like whether that was the user interface of ChatGPT, whether that was, the transformer breakthrough at DeepMind and all this kind of stuff, like there are a lot of like bits and pieces in here, but like you say, like the part where it actually has broken through to the idea of there is something approximating an intelligence that we are able to create. It's so new, and everyone is rushing into it. Like you say, like it is straight over the abyss. Like the amount of money that's being spent here is unreal. And I just wonder if you can step us through. You did this great big piece about the capital intensity here, and the kind of questions that naturally raises, like why are Microsoft, Meta, Amazon going so hard at this?
Well, as you say, like it's there's obviously been work in AI for decades, and you're right that I think it was OpenAI making it so user friendly that really flipped the switch for a lot of people. And if you look at the adoption rate on OpenAI compared to any other computer technology, it's insane. Like how quick they got to 100 million users, faster than everyone from Netflix to TikTok to really any sort of new internet or computer-based service. And so that's why you have these big tech Goliaths throwing like unseemly amounts of money at it, because they can, when you have that kind of adoption rate, it's pretty clear like what the promise will be, in terms of, not necessarily financially, but, but certainly in terms of people craving it, wanting to use it. And so these companies have, intensified their capital expenditure because they need the computing power in terms of the chips. They need the data centers, and they need the electricity. And those are the three right now, the three biggest beneficiaries, NVIDIA, which makes the chips, the companies that are building out the data centers, and, power providers, including nuclear power plants that are being brought back online, like those owned by Constellation. And I think, the question will be, I think they're seeing this as a sort of, not only the companies, but obviously their investors are seeing this as a winner take most market. And so they're trying to be the first and the best to get there, which is why everybody's throwing so much money at it without any clear sense of, where profit or revenue. I mean, there's some sense of where revenue might come from, either subscriptions or advertising, productivity gains, new products, but profit is sort of the open question, I think. I think the one last point I would want to make is that these companies have the money. They're generating so much profit from their other businesses that there's enough money for them to be paying dividends and doing stock buybacks and also ramping up this insane amount of capex, that investors will sort of say, okay, let's see what you can do for now. At some point, though, it will be like, okay, what kind of return are we getting on all this money? But we're not there yet.
But then,
and is there any? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to chip in. But then also, like these big tech companies, they're facing like existential crisis, right? Because if they don't spend on like improving AI and so on, one day they will be easily replaced, like Google search by ChatGPT. So they have to invest at some point to improve it. Just want to chip into the point.
No, I think that's right.
I think that's really interesting because Jeff, again, and Karen, I'd be interested as well, is like, I understand, obviously, they have a lot of money at this point, but when do you think that there would be a revolt? Because if you think about where the global economy is, I mean, we're recording this on Tuesday. The OECD has cut back growth forecasts for the global economy. And, people are talking about a recession in the US. As in, once you start to see a bit more pressure, is this an area where people will start to say, well, I don't know how comfortable we are with you just, spending a ton of money on this and not seeing any return, or not giving us any sense when we will see a return?
I think, look, I mean, if you look, I mean, the timeline is going to be more compressed because of technological moves. But the analogs to this are either the railroads, the building of the railroads, or the development and laying of cable, for internet connections and television. Both of those, just they didn't pay off, because you're always going to overbuild. You're just, and the same thing is going to happen with AI. I mean, I could say it with like pretty reasonable certainty that there will be overbuilding, either in the data center space, energy production, but it will all eventually get used somehow over time. But, it's not going to be enough to justify clearly the return, or the spending. The returns won't be clear to these companies. So there is this, I don't know. The answer is I really don't know when the revolt happens, because as Karen pointed out, this is existential for these companies. They have to do it. Because if you sit back and do nothing, you won't exist at all. So, I think, they're going to have a runway. I would say at least a couple years before anyone says like, hey, what's the ROI on this? And, but the questions will start to come, I think, I would say, after 2-3 years for sure.
I mean, to sharpen that up a little and make one compare and contrast here, Karen, curious as to your take on this. So, Jeff, like you're saying, we have some of the most profitable companies that have ever existed, so successful that they single-handedly or largely are responsible for dragging up American stock markets and so on, well above those in Europe and Asia. they're chasing this, they're spending money, etc. But they have like just these gargantuan businesses feeding them. And then you've got OpenAI, which is a startup, and it's burning billions of dollars a year. And Sam Altman, its boss, doesn't foresee profitability until, later out in this decade. Like, how is that possible? It just seems like it's so crazy that there's just like the shell sitting there that they basically figured out a user interface with ChatGPT, and now they're somehow able to keep up in this hundreds of billions of dollars of kind of cash race. Like, is there a way to think about that?
I really don't know how to answer that question as well, because it's like, how do they turn it over? I mean, like, currently why they're burning so much is because they spend so much money to pay for these, like, to train the models, right? Because the cost of like paying the energy, the data center, and so on. The idea is that, like, currently they're involved in these Stargate projects, like they're building their own data center, and they will have help from like SoftBank, like then they have connection with some chip makers and so on. Then once they got this up and running, they will be able then can like train the model cheaper, perhaps. And then at the same time, they will be able to ramp up their user case in like with businesses, which is where the money is making over there. Because like, how much can you actually make from like charging people $20 a month? To be honest. So I think like the opportunities is that they have to ramp up like the B2B, like having the businesses use more of open AI services and help them to find a use case, so that they will pay them like millions of contracts like on top, and that will when they be able to reverse costs and make more money because then the businesses will pay but extra more than the consumer pay.
And by the way, not to take this into like sort of like this weird, we've talked about the existential threat to these companies. Like, there is this, this, like, nobody wants to talk about this, like, tail risk of like, it may be existential for all of us. And like, so ROI may not be like a real factor for anyone. I mean, and I say this like sort of somewhat flippantly, but we just had an example the other day of an OpenAI model that was told to shut itself down after doing a bunch of processes, and it refused to do so. So like, we are in this zone of like, Space Odyssey type of thing where,
or the lying,
we really don't know where this, like, yes, there's all this promise of these amazing use cases. We really don't know where this technology is going to take us. And so the financial questions are as open as, the functioning of humanity questions are, not to get too esoteric about it.
There was, speaking of romantic advice, I suppose, there was also a similar paper published on whatever the latest models were from Anthropic. And in that, if a model was kind of put into a situation where it had an opportunity to blackmail a researcher over an illicit affair that this, fictional researcher was having, and it took that opportunity. And it's incredible because the researchers kind of step through everything, and then you go a little bit lower down in the document, and there's a sentence just somewhere along the line of just blankly saying, "We do not find these behaviors concerning." It's like, oh, okay. But I don't know. It's like, short of trying to put some sort of discount value on the entirety of human existence and trading that off against the potential benefit from AI, and short of apocalypse, like, what are all these tantalizing use cases? Like, what do people like foresee? Because right now, again, it's like you see the edges of stuff with maybe like a Waymo in the real world, or ChatGPT in the homework cheating world, or, these kind of like generalized like life advice machines, but just like, it still feels like, for me, when do I need to start like actually caring about using these things day to day? I don't know if like, Karen, you have a sense of that, or...
I've been using it day to day, actually. so there you go. Well, I guess, like, I think the vision for like, let's talk about the consumer case. The consumer case is that one day they will be able to help you to, like, if you say, I want to go traveling to Italy, and then help me to book flight and hotel, and then ChatGPT will be able to do it all for you, come up with option, and then all you need to do is just pick what date, pick this option, that's it. And then they will book it for you. You don't need to fill in your credit card details and so on. I think that's what they want you to do every day as like from a consumer case. And that's for like businesses and like bigger vision. I think what Sam Altman was thinking about is that they will be able to solve the biggest problem for the company, or even like help you to build or invent some like new chip technology or new pills to cure some disease, like be able to help you with that. I think that's what the use case that they're envisioning. But at the same time, as we said, as we talk about, at the moment, we don't see much happening. It's still coming up. And also, as we talk about as well, what about the next generation? It's not just about like younger generation, it's also about how we deal with it with the workforce as well, like in law firms and accounting, like in order, if we replace junior workers with like these AI use case, where do we get the junior like workers becoming the senior workers, right? Like how do we train them out? I guess that's a lot of like these questions coming
on the
up
bigger,
as we
I mean, I
develop
think
it.
if you take all of that and you kind of like pull it back even a little bit more, you get to this question of the productivity gains, which is really what ultimately everyone's looking for out of this. And if you continue to need human intervention in all of this because they can't solve the hallucinations, they can't, you have to override it and shut the thing down because it won't shut itself down, whatever it may be. We also have, you still have, there's so many examples of this, but the Health and Human Services Department of the United States submitted some scientific paper on vaccines, and turned out that a lot of the citations were invented and made up, and like to research that didn't exist. So like if you constantly need human intervention, if they can't, if it doesn't get perfected, which there are still open questions about that, that pulls back from the productivity benefits to a certain extent, even if we reshape what junior, people in the workforce are doing and that sort of thing. So I think that's another big piece of the sort of the financial equation in it, or economic, as it were.
I was sort of curious, maybe just like kind of as a final question, that just if you just look at in terms of, as we said, that this is really a race now, right, between these huge companies that we mentioned, Meta, Google, all of these companies who are really trying to kind of, as you said, make sure their businesses stay relevant by investing in this. But I'm just sort of curious, is there any limiting factor to this? Or is the kind of international competition with China, is that just going to keep propelling these companies forward? And I guess, Jeff, I'll start with you, and maybe Karen, you can kind of chip in too.
Yeah, the limiting factor now, I go back to sort of like, the sort of like the doomsday one, which is like whether or not things get to a level where governments come in and say, wait a minute, like this whole like safety measure, we really need to like throttle part of this. You did see it with OpenAI. Karen can speak to it a little bit more, where, they were going to get rid of the whole nonprofit business part of the structure that was meant to like save humanity from AI. And, basically some investors as well as some governments like pushed back on that and said, let's not yet. And, so that while there is like definitely a very lax approach to this in a lot of parts of the world, that to me would feel like the constraining part of it. I don't think money is a factor. I don't think energy is a factor. There is maybe a supply factor. Jonathan can probably speak to it a little bit more about whether, because NVIDIA is basically producing all of the chips for this, whether or not anybody else can match them, and whether or not NVIDIA can build enough factories to build it out. But those would seem to me like the sort of pseudo limiting factors here.
Yeah, I kind of feel like though, like because of what China is pushing and the fear of China coming in to take over everything, as we can see in solar panel and electric vehicle and the batteries, kind of feel like that would drive the US to continue to put like as much effort as this in, like, don't worry about it, you guys go on, do whatever you can to advance the technology. I think this will continue like until at a certain point that we realize the dangers foresee as not comes as normal human being do, to be honest. But I do agree, like the OpenAI case, like how like the local government, like in California, in Delaware, actually like trying to stop, like evaluating, not stop, but evaluating whether OpenAI can change to profit is a good example that there's still some kind of limiting factor there. But we're yet to see whether there are more coming. Maybe some kind of like, if people are thinking that climate change is still an issue one day, then maybe.
Judges in Delaware once again saving humanity, possibly. Okay, I think that's as good a place as any to wrap it. Jeff, Karen, thank you so much for joining us on the Viewsroom.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. This podcast was produced by Oliver Tashlich in London. You can listen to a new episode of The Viewsroom every Thursday on the Reuters app or your favourite platform. And don't forget to tune in to our sister podcast, The Big View, every Tuesday, as well as the other great podcasts from the Reuters team. If you like what you heard, please follow The Viewsroom and let us know what you thought. And check out our views on the biggest stories in business and finance every day at breakingviews.com and reuters.com.